facing any issue related to sound or connectivity, please write in the comment box below. We shall be starting our session soon, as we are waiting for some of our participants to join the session. So, good afternoon everyone. CUNIX welcomes you to today's webinar. Topic of today's webinar is CMMI for Services Implementation Guidance. My name is Khushbu Mistry and I am your host for today's webinar. I am working with CUNIX as Marketing Executive International Business. Talking about CUNIX. We are a management consulting organization having experience of more than 25 years with 350 plus satisfied clients present in 19 plus countries. CUNIX is CMMI Institute partner organization, and as of now we have done more than 250 plus CMMI appraisals. In 2016, we were among top 10 partners of CMMI Institute USA for new appraisals. Moving further, I would like have pleasure of introduce you to the presenter of today's session, Mr. Hitesh Sanghvi. Mr. Hitesh Sanghvi, Managing Director of CUNIX Infotech. He is a CMMI Institute authorized High Maturity Lead Appraiser, CMMI Institute authorized Campi Lead Appraiser, and CMMI Institute authorized Lead Instructor with a rich experience of 22 plus years and 4,000 man days in various areas like SPI consulting, software measurements, high maturity organization practices using CMM, CMMI, competency, models and training. Mr. Hitesh is also active contributor to organizations like Mumbai SCON and CSI and many other academic and management institutions. Now I would request Mr. Hitesh to take over the session. I request you all to write your queries in the comment box. We shall take them up in the Q&A sessions at the end of today's webinar. Thank you.
Good afternoon everybody. Welcome to this workshop and seminar on CMMI for Services Implementation. I'm Hitesh Sanghvi and it's a really a pleasure to be with all of you. So for those who are outside India, good morning or good evening, and it's a pleasure to be with you. So let's start. I hope you can see the screen, and I'll go through the slides and you can write down your questions. So whatever the information that we are showing you, it belongs to CMMI Institute, and that's a copyright information, and any reproduction of this is not permitted without the permission from CMMI Institute. So looking at how do we create a service value, let's start with the value of business, because any service will definitely create some value, else it's not a useful service. So those who are acquainted with CMMI development, there is a difference between CMMI for development and CMMI for services. When you look at development, it is a full engineering cycle, right from requirements, design, production, integration and delivery. So initially there is nothing and you create something. In services, you walk into the service provider with some problem, or you want to add some value, and just like this training. If you, for example, if you go for a training, you go into the training and you come out, but you come with some added knowledge. There is no much development. So there are some information that I'm sure you have started reading about the service values. We need to plan a consistent value delivery. The service may give you value in terms of time, money, efforts, risk, branding, and each service has an economic value. Sometimes you can compute the financial ROI, return on investment, or sometimes it's complicated. Value is not always in terms of customers' business outcomes. It also depends on customers' perceptions. Definition and differentiation of the value is always in the mind of the customer. It's not so simple like a product. But then some customers want different factors and the others want some different type of factors. And that is influence. Their preferences are influenced by their perceptions. And their perceptions are dependent on their expectations. So, various service attributes which influences a service are different from various types of businesses of service. That is a hospital, airlines, taxi service, moving service, software service, IT service. It depends. The critical factors are varying from one industry to the other industry. And service providers must demonstrate the value and influence the perceptions and the preferences of the customers. Service should be defined and focus on business outcomes. That's very important. So each service management has a strategy. Basically, a strategy tells you why are we providing these services, what is the demand in the market, and what type of perceptions does the customer want, whether this service will work in the industry. So these are the strategies that you need to identify in the beginning of setting up a service business and at milestones to understand whether your services are required by the customers and in what form. Then you have to design the service. How are you actually going to deliver? It's a go to the market model where you are going to look at how your activities will satisfy customer outcomes. There is also a concept of service transition. Today you have a particular attribute of a service and tomorrow you are going to be different. So if you are providing service on Linux platform and then if you change it to cloud, then this is called a service transition. Or you are offering taxi services only in Mumbai and then you start another service for Mumbai and some other cities, then it's service transition. Then comes the process part, the operations of service, day-to-day operations, and how are you going to conduct these operations. And definitely with the customer feedback and as you learn, you will have continuous improvement in your service. So there will be things that go wrong, there will be incidents, there will be some defects in the processes. So a strategy of service should always be supported by a business case in terms of purpose, methods, assumptions, business impacts, risk, contingencies and recommendations. So when you define a service business, there will be a service portfolio which basically talks about a service catalog. So just like it's a menu in a hotel which tells you what all services are we going to offer. That's a service that's a catalog. So similarly, if you are going for insurance, you will definitely find various types of schemes, and that is a service catalog. If you are going for a software maintenance service, there will be different types of services and descriptions. And if you are offering a service in a hospital, well, there also you have a single bed and a special room or an ICU. So there are different types and categories of services and the properties with SLAs, service level agreements, which are included in the service catalog. Depending upon the type of service and the type of organization, there are different types of service providers. So you have internal service providers. Now that's an example where an IT department is servicing its internal customers, or a training department or a quality department or a design department is servicing its customers who are inside the organization. That is the internal service provider. You have external service providers where your customers give you actual revenue and they are external to the organization, and shared service providers, which is a hybrid of the two. You can have an internal service provider or a department like quality, design or training, who also wants to make some profit, and they provide services to internal as well as the external customers. And what you have is service portfolio management. As I told you, it's in continuation with service catalog. Portfolio is a group of investment. There are similar characteristics, grouped by size, discipline and strategic value. So there are 6 different R's of existing services. So what you have is retain the service. That means you continue giving the same service. Replace the service. So you replace like an operating system with another operating system, or you replace a taxi service where, you know, instead of black and white taxi, you give modern taxis. Rationalize your services. That is a higher version of a better service. Refactor. Refactor is basically you have to, same service, you divide into sub-services and offer them as modules. Renewal of service. So sometimes you have SIM cards where you have to renew a 3-month plan with another 3-month or 6-month plan, and the new plan may differ from the old plan. So it's the same service but with new options. And the last one is retire. Service retires when the organization finds that either the service is not required, or it has already changed the form and the customer wants it in a different form, and they have to come out with a new set of services and retire or stop the older set of services. It's like Windows older version has been stopped by Microsoft and they start with another new version. So as you know, we are going to talk about some process areas which are useful in CMMI for services. But before you go to the process areas, we have some generic practices. So for each area, these generic practices are applicable. They are general management practices which has to exist in an organization for any department or area to work properly. So some of them are, we call them GPs, generic practice. It ranges from 2.1 to 2.10, like establish an organization policy. So for example, if you have an SLA, you will have a policy for setting an SLA. If you have a pricing, then you will have a policy for pricing. GP 2.2 is plan the process. You should have a plan for your processes. 2.3 talks about you should provide resources. Resources can be of 5 types: man, machine, material, method and money. So these are the 5 types of resources and they need to be identified for each type of service. Assign responsibility. Responsibility can be in form of primary, secondary, joint, collaborative. And GP 2.5 means train people. So anybody who is in a particular department and doing a particular work in service delivery or service definition should be trained adequately to understand the customer needs and provide the right type of service. 2.6 talks of control work products, that is like configuration management, where every item you create, any input or output is under configuration control. It needs to be identified and version controlled. 2.7 is identify and involve relevant stakeholders, where you need to make stakeholder matrix, you can use various forms. One of the example is RACI, RACI, that is responsible, accountable, concerned and informed. Some people call, instead of concerned, they say consulted and informed. So that's where the business continuity is ensured, where if somebody is not there, the other person can take over. 2.8 is monitor and control of that activity using metrics, measurements and corrective actions. 2.9 is talking about objectively evaluate adherence. This means each of these service sub-processes should be audited or checked objectively by somebody else other than who is doing that activity. This is to ensure that consistent quality is maintained and the process is adhered. GP 2.10 talks about review status with higher level management. This is where a senior is going to review the directions and identify if some improvements are required. Also, the senior is going to look at whether the objectives of the service or that particular department are met. You also have GP 3.1, that means you should establish a defined process. A defined process will include procedures, checklist, guidelines and templates. And GP 3.2, collect process related experience. These are lessons learned, improvements, reusable artifacts, and these activities will go into the process asset library so that they are available for further reuse to save time and cost. So GP 3.1 and GP 3.2 is more towards CMMI maturity level 3, and the GP 2.1 series that you see is more to define CMMI maturity level 2. So moving ahead, let's look at some of the process areas that we have in CMMI for services. The first process area that we discuss is requirements management. So basically the goal is to manage the requirement. That is the first specific goal. You see that SG1. This means you have to understand the requirements carefully. So let's understand the word understand over here. The meaning of word understand means the management of the service provider and the team of service provider, they exactly know what the customer wants and they exactly know how to deliver. So this can be in form of documentation, a process or a procedure or a standard operating procedure. It can be a presentation where it lists the customer details and requirements. These requirements should be committed in some agreement between the vendor, service provider and the customers. Any requirement changes, they have to be managed, and you have to use a bidirectional traceability of requirements to manage this. A bidirectional traceability is basically impact of a change on other sub-processes which are downstream the entire life cycle. And finally, whatever are the changes or the impacts, it has to be updated into the plan to ensure that alignment between the work and the requirements is met. Requirements management mostly deals with understanding the service components and the customer requirements and what needs to be done to satisfy using verification and validation. The next process area is work planning. So here we have three goals. The first goal is establish estimates. So for any type of service, so I'll take an example of IT service provider where you have to establish a service strategy. You say, are we going to do it in-house with a team of IT people, or we are going to outsource it? That's a service strategy. If you are going to outsource it, then there is another process area called SAM, Supplier Agreement Management, that will be coming into practice. Estimate the scope of the work. You need to identify various tasks in terms of simple, medium, complex, or there can be any other calibration, and identify what exactly is included in the service life cycle. And then you establish work products and attributes. What are the deliverables of the service? Task attributes can be different types of tasks with start date, end date, whether it is internal, external, is it controlled, uncontrolled. It depends upon the type of service. Define life cycle phases. So each service has many phases. So a call center would look at like phases of receiving the call, acknowledging the call, recording the request, processing the request, validating the customer satisfaction, and completing the process formalities. So life cycle needs to be defined for each type of service. If you take a patient in a hospital, it also has a life cycle, right from admission of the patient, diagnosis, tests, treatments, billing, and release. And then that leads to the estimate of effort and cost. On the basis of this initial information, one has to develop a work plan which talks about budget, the schedule, risks, data management, required resources in terms of 5M, man, machine, material, method, money, and needed knowledge, skills, and competencies. Obtain commitment to the plan. So whatever is the plan for the service needs to be understood by everybody. It has to be committed by both the parties. All the resources required for service delivery in terms and budgets should be committed. It should be reviewed by relevant stakeholders. Changes needs to be impacted. You need to reconcile or change or deploy more resources if required, and this needs to be committed to the organization. This would be a planning cycle for work planning. I'd like to show you some example templates. It's very crowded template, but I hope at least you can see the title. Example template, this is for a data management plan, where you are looking at various data items, responsibility of people who are going to manage the data items, file location, frequency. You can still add some more attributes like how long do you retain this particular item and when do you dispose this particular item, or some read, write, access for each of these items. Another example template is which is included in the plan is stakeholder matrix. So you have various rows where you have steps of service processes. It's a life cycle, and in the columns you have relevant stakeholders, and you have identified whether this particular stakeholder has what type of role, like he is required or he is optional. A means as needed, L is a leader, and you need to know how each of these roles interact and in what capacity in various life cycle processes. Work monitoring and control. Whatever you plan needs to be monitored. So you have two goals over here: monitor the work against the plan, where you need to have work monitoring parameters. The parameters can be time, velocity, cost, risks, number of requirements completed, defects, non-compliances, or any other important parameter that is affecting the goal. Monitor commitments of each tasks, monitor risk, data management, and stakeholder involvement. These are the 4 things that we have identified in the plan, and we are going to monitor it. Conduct progress reviews, conduct milestone reviews. Progress reviews are continuous. They happen at a higher frequency. So there can be a daily progress review, if at all it's an agile team delivering service, or it can be a weekly progress review. In some services where the transactions are very high, monitoring is happening on an hourly basis. Milestone reviews happen at lesser frequency at particular milestones which are defined in the life cycle. The audience for both these reviews are different. Milestone reviews might have customers, milestone reviews can also have senior management. The agenda for these two types of reviews are different. Progress reviews look at day-to-day activities, milestone reviews look at a higher, maybe monthly or weekly. And whatever are the issues, we manage corrective actions, we analyze the issues, and we have to manage the corrective actions to closure. Risk is something that you need to plan pretty early. There are known risks, there are unknown risks. You have to identify the risk sources and categories. Sources are the areas where there are weaknesses, and you know that these weaknesses will come out with scenarios and incidents which will create trouble. You have to identify the risk parameters like severity, probability, it can be other parameters like cost, and on the basis of that identify risk management strategy, whether you want to accept the risk or delegate or transfer the risk, and accordingly make risk mitigation plans and implement these plans to see that the risk is mitigated. Well, I have a small template which talks about the risk source, risk title, category, responsibility, and the impact. So this is an example. You can also have a contingency plan, which is a backup plan for a risk mitigation plan. Configuration management talks about configuration items. Any item that is impacted or is impacting other items has to be tracked and version controlled. And all these items, they may be process items, software items, or hardware items, they are stored in CMDB. These CMDB needs to be backed up, or you have to baseline this at relevant intervals. So the list of baselines should be stored in a baseline register so that you can always go back to a previous instance and invoke that particular instance so that you can identify what were the state of these items at that particular point in time. So goals and objectives of transition. Effective transition means enable to integrate release into business processes and services. So any change happens, it has to be, the change impact has to take place and they have to be integrated into the business processes. And transition project risk management. We have already discussed about some of the risks, so I will move ahead. And each of these changes and risks, they need to have responsibilities. Who's going to raise the change? Who's going to record the change? And for each change, we have to identify the impact, cost, benefit, resource requirements, and relevant parameters. We also have to develop business justification for approving a change to see that it does not have any adverse impacts on the business objectives and activities. Request for change register is required for review and to see whether the changes have been implemented properly in the process. Types of change. There can be small changes, a basic change which is it may not impact other items, and there can be complex changes which impacts many more items and you have to take care of the impact. With respect to a timeline, there can be urgent change which has to be done within a finite time because there is a business risk associated. Standard change, these are procedural changes. It's an accepted solution to an identifiable and relatively common set of requirements. Standard changes will take its own life cycle and do it. Urgent change needs to have a separate tailored life cycle to meet the timelines. change control process. So, well, change control process, it will take you through various steps on change management to understand, filter, prioritize the changes, check the change, approve or reject the change to the change control board or change, that is CCB, or in some organizations called CAB. It has to be reviewed by the senior management for approval, rejection or tailoring. Then you have to build the change into the processes or into your service components. It has to be tested by an independent tester and finally integrated into your service systems. Questions? Process and product quality assurance. So the processes that are regulating the services, your standard operating procedures, need to be ensured that everybody follows these procedures. If at all there are any tailorings, they need to be checked. And product quality assurance, if the services is creating some subcomponents of products, that also needs to be checked. So you have to check the processes and the work products and the service components, communicate the non-compliances, resolve them in a finite amount of time with proper communication with the relevant stakeholders, establish the records for future improvement, and ensure that corrective action and preventive action is taken to resolve these non-compliances. In service industry, depending upon the type of business, there has to be measurement, and anything measured should be analyzed to see whether the goals are met. So here the first goal is align the measurement activities. So any measurement should always be towards an objective. The objective needs to be satisfied. You have to specify the measures, the unit of measurement, frequency, data collection and analysis procedures, and follow these procedures. Like you have to collect the data, analyze the data. It can be simple quantitative analysis or statistical analysis by graphs, charts, or it can be a logical analysis. Store this data and communicate the results so that other people can have a look and learn from the analysis, identify action items for closure or for further improvement. So I'll take a quick 2-minute break. If you have any questions, else I'll continue with the second half. Is it? So it seems there are no questions as of now, so we'll look at them at the end of the session. Coming to a very important process area called capacity management, capacity and availability. So you have various types of capacity parameters called business capacity management. This basically tells you how much business can you perform, how many transactions per day, how many service requests per hour. That's your business capacity, that's your factory output. Service capacity management talks about, apart from measuring the number of services that we can do, how well we can do it. So this is more focused on how effective it is in terms of giving good services, apart from giving more services. Resource capacity management, are we equipped with the right type of resources in terms of the 5 M's, man, machine, material, method and money, to ensure that the resources are available and adequate enough to satisfy the customer requests and satisfy the service level agreements. So there are some examples of business capacity management in terms of SLAs, service level agreements and service level requests that we get. They should be included in the business plan and the capacity plan. The capacity plan should be based on the business plan. So if you are planning to increase your revenue by, let's say, X%, you'll have to look at how much amount of capacity also we have to include. And that has to be measured using various modeling techniques, analytical and statistical techniques, and come out with different types of schemes where you can manage the business capacity with existing resources. One good example that I remember is, in some restaurants there is happy hours during the afternoon time. So when the business is low, you give them some happy hours, and these are the part of capacity management. Availability management. So at any point in time, what is the available resource and how? If you are going to a car repair garage, you may have 40 mechanics. And but you may not have space to park the car. You can only park 10 cars. So in that case, you are wasting money on the mechanics, because you cannot park more than 10 cars, and for 10 cars you may need about 10 to 15 mechanics. So you need to understand the availability, and availability is not for one parameter. Many parameters are linked, as I told you, the mechanics and the number of cars and the parking space. Every service will have some incident. So when you have incident has a life cycle. The incident occurs, it is recorded after detection, then it's diagnosed, repair, recovery, restoration. And in CMMI you have two levels of incident resolution. The first one is a workaround, which is a current solution for today's problem. But some of these incidents, after giving a workaround, looking at the frequency and probability and the severity, we identify them for a permanent solution. We want to prevent these incidents. Well, in that case, you have to go for a problem approach. So you have to identify those selected incidents, identify the root causes, look at the area of weakness, fix it, and ensure for the couple of period of time, maybe a few weeks unit of time, or a month's unit of time, or a quarter's unit of time, depending upon the incident, to ensure and verify and monitor that these incidents are not occurring again. So there are workaround and problem approach, which is used for incident management. You can measure various metrics like mean time between failures or mean time between the incidents, and mean time between failures should increase, and time between system incidents. These two variables should be controlled. Why do we do incident management? So basically, an incident would disturb your business, and if you do incident management well by solving some of the problems, the number of incidents that you get will reduce every day, and that's where slowly the effort and the cost and the noise of your business will be impacted. All these parameters which are a waste, they should reduce by proper incident management. Incidents can be classified as with impact of the incident, urgency or priority, and different incident can be treated depending upon which category they belong to. The incident needs to be escalated sometimes if it is severe or it is repeating, to line managers, and it should be also reported to the IT service manager or that business manager, so that they can take a decision whether it should be a workaround or there is a persistent problem, and we have to invoke the problem resolution approach. Coming to the organization infrastructure of learning and processes. So a service organization may have many processes, and you collect all these processes, that is OPD, Organization Process Definition, It will have measurement repository, process asset library, reusable components, knowledge database, experience database. Organization process focus is an activity of continuous improvement in a service organization by identifying the improvement areas, closing them, implementing them so that your processes are not stale, they are not obsolete, and they are responding to various challenges. Organization process performance is statistical based activity at maturity level 4, which talks of baselines and statistical data to see how controlled are your operations and how many signals you have within the operations, how many outliers are there, and how many each incidents will be reported there, which will invoke corrective actions. OT is organization training. All the roles and responsibilities that are involved in the service processes and sub-processes should be adequately trained by the training department by identifying their business needs, process needs, and technology needs. So we have already talked about requirements and strategy. Business impact analysis also talks about identification of critical business processes. We also talked about risk assessment. Coming to service continuity. So service continuity, there are 3 goals. You have to ensure that essential service dependencies like people, machines, material, even the cash flow on the budgets are available for ensuring service continuity. You need to prepare for that, plan for that, and verify that service continuity plans are in place. Typical problems in IT are, server crashes, people not being available, and you have different types of recovery options in case you have server problems or data continuity problems. Coming to service system transition. These are new services or change services. So you have to prepare for change of service, analyze why we need the change, develop the transition plans, and communicate to various stakeholders so that they are prepared for the change. And then you have to deploy the service system change. When we are talking of service level management, it's an SLA management. The primary goal is to maintain and gradually improve business aligned IT quality service by proper definition of an SLA, agreement to an SLA, monitoring, reporting of an SLA. An SLA is broken, you are breaking the promise with the customer. Responsibilities, I think we already discussed in the responsibility matrix. The structure of SLAs can be at an individual level, it can be at a department level. For each customer, it can be separate, or at a corporate level if you are giving services to a corporate group. The SLA contents, mostly SLA can be in terms of time, like a pizza you get in 20 minutes, or it can be in terms of quality, with acceptable quality levels, reliability, or security breach. It can also be in terms of service continuity, so that 99% or 99.9% internet should be available, that is an SLA. So they can assume different forms. Coming to service operations, broadly it's an help desk and it has to check that various types of services in the business are taken care of, like change management, problem management, configuration management, release management, managing service levels from the customers, and continuity management. Each of these is a big topic and we are going to cover them in forthcoming webinars. This is just a brief. All these things are required for setting up a service desk with a proper definition and understanding of business needs. Customers and continuity management. Each of these is a big topic and we are going to cover them in forthcoming webinars. This is just a brief. All these things are required for setting up a service desk with a proper definition and understanding of business needs, clear objectives. There can be different types of service desks, like local service desk in a department or a particular location, centralized service desk which is managing service requests from various different types of
customers, and a virtual service desk, which can manage multi-location, irrespective of the type, people, language, and the culture. Well, this is a long session. However, this was a brief introduction. We having series of seminars on each of these topics